Born into slavery during the final months of the Civil War, kidnapped by Confederate raiders as an infant and traded back to his enslaver for a single racehorse, orphaned before he could walk, denied formal education by laws that forbade teaching enslaved people to read, this child seemed destined for a life of obscurity and hardship, yet he would grow to become one of America's most influential scientists, a pioneering agricultural chemist who revolutionized Southern farming, developed hundreds of products from peanuts and sweet potatoes, advised presidents and industrialists, and whose innovations in sustainable agriculture remain relevant over a century after his greatest discoveries. His journey from bondage to international recognition represents one of the most remarkable stories of genius overcoming systematic oppression, yet his name has faded from prominence despite contributions that transformed American agriculture and laid foundations for fields from environmental science to biotechnology. This is the extraordinary life of George Washington Carver, the man born enslaved who became perhaps the greatest scientist America has ever produced, whose brilliance shone through barriers of racism and poverty that would have crushed a lesser spirit. George Washington Carver was born around 1864 on a Missouri plantation owned by Moses Carver, though the exact date remains unknown as enslaved people's births were rarely recorded with precision. His mother Mary was enslaved by the Carvers, and his father, also enslaved, died in an accident before George was born, leaving Mary to raise George and his older brother James alone while working in the fields. The Civil War raged across Missouri, a border state torn between Union and Confederate sympathies, creating chaos and lawlessness that made enslaved people vulnerable to kidnapping by raiders who would sell them in states where slavery remained entrenched. When George was only a few weeks old, Confederate night riders attacked the Carver farm, kidnapping Mary and infant George to sell them in the Deep South. Moses Carver, despite being a slaveholder, was reported to be relatively humane by the standards of the era, and he sent an agent to search for Mary and George. The agent tracked him to Arkansas and managed to recover only George, negotiating his return in exchange for one of Moses Carver's prized racehorses, a transaction that valued the infant at roughly $300. Mary was never found, sold into the brutal slavery of the Deep South, her fate unknown, leaving George to grow up without ever knowing his mother beyond fragments of memory. After slavery's abolition, Moses and Susan Carver raised George and James as family members rather than laborers, though the boys faced constant discrimination in the violently racist post-war Missouri. Young George was frail and sickly, suffering from respiratory problems that prevented him from heavy farm work, so instead he helped Susan Carver with domestic tasks and developed an intense fascination with plants and nature. He would wander the woods surrounding the farm, collecting specimens, observing growth patterns, experimenting with cross-pollination and grafting techniques that he taught himself through observation and intuition. Neighbors began calling him the plant doctor because he could diagnose and cure diseases in crops and gardens, demonstrating botanical knowledge that seemed almost supernatural in someone so young with no formal training. George desperately wanted to learn to read, but the local school was closed to black children by law, a common pattern across America where education was deliberately withheld from formerly enslaved people to maintain systems of oppression. At age 12, George learned that a school for black children existed in the town of Neosho, 8 miles away, so he simply left the Carver farm and walked there alone, determined to get an education regardless of the obstacles. In Neosho, he found shelter with a black couple who allowed him to sleep in their barn in exchange for doing chores, and he attended the Lincoln School for Colored Children, absorbing knowledge with an intensity that amazed his teachers. For the next decade, George Washington Carver moved from town to town across Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa, working as a cook, launderer, and farmhand to support himself while attending whatever schools would accept him. He applied to Highland College in Kansas and was initially accepted based on his excellent academic record, but when he arrived on campus, administrators saw his race and refused to admit him, a crushing rejection that demonstrated the barriers facing even exceptional black students in post-Civil War America. Undeterred, Carver continued his education, finally gaining admission to Simpson College in Iowa, where he studied art and piano, displaying talents that could have led to a career in painting had his art teacher not recognized that science was his true calling. His art teacher, Etta Budd, whose father chaired the horticulture department at Iowa State Agricultural College, encouraged Carver to transfer there to study botany and agriculture. In 1891, at age 26 or 27, Carver became the first black student admitted to Iowa State, facing discrimination and isolation but excelling academically through sheer brilliance and determination. He earned his bachelor's degree in 1894, then became the first black person to earn a master's degree from Iowa State in 1896, conducting groundbreaking research on plant pathology and mycological investigations that established his reputation as a rising scientific talent. If these stories of extraordinary individuals who overcame impossible odds to transform science and society inspire you, consider subscribing to Hidden Minds and activating the notification bell to discover more remarkable journeys of genius emerging from adversity, brilliant minds whose contributions deserve to be remembered and celebrated. While completing his master's degree, Carver received an unprecedented offer from Booker T. Washington, the famous educator who had founded the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama to provide vocational education for black students. Washington recognized that African Americans in the South needed practical agricultural knowledge to escape poverty, and he wanted Carver to lead Tuskegee's new agriculture department despite having virtually no budget or equipment. In 1896, Carver accepted the position and moved to Alabama, beginning a career at Tuskegee that would last 47 years until his death, during which he would revolutionize Southern agriculture and inspire generations of black students to pursue scientific careers. Carver arrived in Alabama to find agriculture in crisis, as decades of growing cotton as a monoculture had depleted the soil of nutrients, leaving farms increasingly unproductive and trapping both black and white farmers in cycles of debt and poverty. The entire Southern economy depended on cotton, yet the crop was literally destroying the land it grew on, creating ecological and economic disaster that threatened millions of livelihoods. Carver recognized that the solution required changing both crops and farming practices, shifting from extractive monoculture to sustainable diversified agriculture that would restore soil health while providing farmers with alternative income sources. He began conducting extensive agricultural research using the most rudimentary equipment, often building his own apparatus from discarded materials because Tuskegee had almost no funding for scientific instruments. Carver discovered that nitrogen-fixing plants like peanuts, sweet potatoes, and soybeans could replenish soil nutrients depleted by cotton, essentially providing free fertilizer while producing valuable crops. He developed crop rotation systems where farmers would alternate cotton with nitrogen-fixing crops, restoring soil fertility naturally and increasing overall productivity without expensive chemical inputs. However, convincing farmers to plant peanuts and sweet potatoes instead of cotton created a new problem. Limited markets for these crops meant farmers could not sell the surplus they were now producing. Carver's genius appeared most vividly in his response to this challenge, as he began systematically investigating alternative uses for peanuts and sweet potatoes, developing products that would create demand and markets where none previously existed. Over the following decades, Carver developed over 300 products from peanuts alone, including milk, flour, ink, dyes, plastics, wood stains, soap, linoleum, cosmetics, and countless other materials. He created over 100 products from sweet potatoes, ranging from synthetic rubber to postage stamp adhesive to library paste. These were not mere theoretical possibilities but practical products he actually created in his laboratory, demonstrating that Southern agriculture could diversify beyond cotton dependence into industrial and commercial applications. Carver's research methods were unorthodox but brilliantly effective, combining rigorous scientific investigation with intuitive experimentation and what he called his ability to hear what plants were telling him. He worked with minimal equipment and virtually no budget, yet produced results that rivaled well-funded industrial laboratories, essentially founding the field of Chemurgy, the industrial use of agricultural products, decades before it received formal recognition. His work anticipated modern developments in sustainable agriculture, renewable materials, and biotechnology by nearly a century. Beyond his scientific achievements, Carver became an influential educator and communicator who brought agricultural science directly to farmers through innovative extension programs. He developed the movable school, essentially a wagon equipped with agricultural tools and samples that traveled to rural areas demonstrating improved farming techniques to people who could not travel to Tuskegee. He published practical bulletins in simple language explaining crop rotation, soil improvement, and food preservation techniques, making cutting-edge agricultural science accessible to farmers with limited formal education. Carver's reputation grew steadily, attracting attention from industrialists, politicians, and fellow scientists who recognized his genius despite the racism that pervaded American society. Thomas Edison offered him a position at an enormous salary, which Carver declined because he felt his mission was to serve black farmers in the South. Henry Ford became a close friend and supporter, recognizing that Carver's work on plant-based industrial materials aligned with his own interest in alternative materials for automobile manufacturing. In 1921, Carver testified before the United States House Ways and Means Committee about tariffs on peanuts, initially given 10 minutes to speak but holding the committee's attention for over an hour and a half as he demonstrated product after product derived from peanuts, displaying both scientific brilliance and remarkable communication skills that transcended racial prejudices. His testimony helped secure protective tariffs that expanded American peanut farming, transforming it from a minor crop into a major agricultural industry worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Despite his growing fame, Carver lived simply, never marrying, dedicating his life entirely to his research and teaching at Tuskegee. He refused to patent most of his discoveries, believing that innovations meant to help poor farmers should be freely available rather than locked behind intellectual property restrictions. This principled stance cost him the fortune he could have earned from his hundreds of inventions, but ensured that his work directly benefited those who needed it most. Carver received numerous honors during his later life, including fellowship in the Royal Society of Arts in Britain, making him one of very few Americans so recognized. President Franklin Roosevelt visited him at Tuskegee and authorized creation of the Carver National Monument in Missouri, the first national monument dedicated to an African American and the first honoring someone other than a president. Time magazine featured him on its cover, universities awarded him honorary degrees, and his reputation as America's greatest agricultural scientist seemed secure. George Washington Carver died on January 5, 1943, at approximately age 78, the exact age uncertain because his birth date was never precisely recorded. He was buried on the Tuskegee campus beside Booker T. Washington, having spent 47 years transforming the institution and Southern agriculture. His life savings of $60,000, a modest sum accumulated through frugal living and the salary Tuskegee paid him, was donated to establish the Carver Research Foundation to continue his work. In the decades following his death, Carver's reputation underwent a complex evolution, simultaneously celebrated as a Black achievement icon while his actual scientific contributions were sometimes minimized or misunderstood. Some accounts reduced him to the man who invented peanut butter, a myth that oversimplified and trivialized his actual accomplishments, which were far more significant than any single product. Others dismissed his work as practical tinkering rather than real science, a characterization that ignored the sophisticated chemical analyses and innovative methodologies underlying his product development. Modern reassessment has restored appreciation for Carver's pioneering contributions to multiple fields that did not exist as formal disciplines during his lifetime. His work on sustainable agriculture anticipated by decades the organic farming movement and concerns about soil depletion and chemical dependency. His development of plant-based industrial materials foreshadowed contemporary research into bioplastics, renewable materials, and green chemistry. His emphasis on crop diversification and rotating nitrogen-fixing plants remains fundamental to sustainable farming practices worldwide. Perhaps most significantly, Carver demonstrated that scientific genius could emerge from any background regardless of the barriers society erected, that lack of resources could be overcome through creativity and determination, and that science at its best serves human needs rather than abstract knowledge alone. His ability to conduct world-class research with minimal equipment inspired scientists in developing nations and under-resourced institutions, proving that expensive apparatus matters less than observational skills and innovative thinking. The tragedy is that systemic racism prevented Carver from receiving resources and recognition commensurate with his abilities during most of his career, limiting what he might have achieved with adequate funding, properly equipped laboratories, and collaborators at his intellectual level. How many additional discoveries might he have made with the support routinely available to white scientists of lesser talent? How many other George Washington Carvers were prevented from developing their abilities entirely because they lacked even the minimal opportunities that allowed Carver to emerge? Today, as we face challenges of sustainable agriculture, climate change, and developing renewable alternatives to petroleum-based products, Carver's work seems more relevant than ever. His vision of agriculture as a source of industrial materials, his methods for improving soil health naturally, and his emphasis on local solutions using available resources offer blueprints for addressing contemporary crises. George Washington Carver rose from slavery to become one of America's greatest scientists, transforming agriculture for millions while developing innovations that anticipated fields that would not fully emerge until long after his death. His journey from kidnapped infant traded for a horse to internationally recognized scientist represents an extraordinary triumph of human potential over systematic oppression, a reminder that genius can emerge from anywhere if given even the smallest opportunity to develop. His story demands that we recognize how much talent remains undeveloped when societies deny opportunities based on race, class, or circumstance, and challenges us to ensure that future George Washington Carvers receive the resources and recognition they deserve from the beginning rather than having to overcome impossible obstacles to achieve recognition.